Now I know what you all are thinking. Oh noes, now he's really done it. He's about to touch the most controversial Crash game of all time. And indeed, you are right to describe this game as contentious. Almost all of the Radical games were. Sure, the games by Traveler's Tales and Vicarious Visions weren't quite up to par with the originals, but at least they played it safe. Hell, one or two of them I might even call good. But along comes Radical Entertainment, who basically took everything from Twinsanity and maxed it out to 11. And while I do hear a lot of bad things with tag team racing, nothing sparks more division than Crash of the Titans. I feel like this is one of those games that you either love or hate. Either you rip apart the new character designs and personalities, or you love it. Either you hate the fact that the gameplay has become more combat-centric and less about platforming, or you love it. Either you despise Crash's obnoxious personality and hate his single, annoying line, "Pancakes!" or you love it. Well, I was one of the latter, having reviewed it back in 2021, where I claimed it was my favorite Crash Bandicoot game. To be honest, I'm not sure if I'd go as far to say that's still the case, but playing it now, I can confidently say that Crash of the Titans is a good game. Yes, I know. Shocker. I for one appreciate the steps Titans took to create a Crash Bandicoot that feels unique in its own way. But as you'll see in the review, not all of it was polished. Certainly Crash of the Titans could have been a revolutionary Crash Bandicoot game if it had a second look over. However, its shortcomings prevent it from truly achieving that. And don't worry, this isn't going to be me complaining about how Crash of the Titans isn't like the originals. Rather, I'll be going down to different aspects of this game and trying to demonstrate that while Crash of the Titans has a good frame, the edges and smears prevent it from making a complete picture. Well, sit back and relax as I dive into the most controversial Crash Bandicoot game, Crash of the Titans. Well, now you've really done it. You've officially stepped on the landmine. Oh, come on. I'm sure we can find some common ground in certain areas with my audience. Common ground my ass. This is the internet we're talking about. If you don't agree with them, then they're just gonna rip you apart. Good luck getting roasted in the comments section. Well, at least I try. Man, I really need to start working on those comebacks. Of all the things that Radical changed, from the gameplay to the overall presentation, there is not one that seems to garner more resentment than the character designs. Or at least, that's what I get when I listen to certain opinions of this game. Yes, they certainly were a major revolution compared to what was seen in previous eras, but to be honest, some of these designs are a step forward compared to past iterations. Take Crash, for instance. There's a part of me that felt like his PS1 model was a splash of orange paint plastered on the screen. Of course, the 6th generation was a bit of a hit or miss, with his Wrath of Cortex design looking less than ideal, while his Nitro Kart persona having a bit more life, but also somewhat placid and plain. But with his Titans look, Radical did a complete 180 and placed tribal tattoos on his arms while having him sport a fully fledged mohawk. And honestly, this is probably the coolest looking he's ever been. Considering that Crash of the Titans is a game that has him doing combat and taking control of mutants, it's only natural that he takes a level in badass. If Crash retained his old design, it wouldn't fit. The two contrasting designs of Crash's innocence and a monstrous Titans would really clash. So Radical's redesign of Crash Bandicoot is far more appropriate than a change in tone. He feels a bit more grown up, for lack of a better word. Or perhaps, brimming with personality best describes it. He isn't just a half-naked Bandicoot jumping around and spinning, but now he's a half-naked Bandicoot more daring and adventurous, willing to go to the ends of the earth to save his sister. And speaking of Crash's sister, her design also gets under fire for being different and therefore ruined. She was going for a teenage look starting in Crash Nitro Kart, and her Titan's design is the epitome of it. She's let her hair down, and now she wears a blue headscarf instead of a ponytail. Well, in my eyes, this design is inoffensive. Sure, maybe I understand that there are some strange decisions like how thin her neck is, but to be honest, some of the other modern iterations of Coco also had thin necks. For the most part, I wouldn't say this is a bad design. It definitely does look like an older interpretation of the character, somewhat more teen-like, which, as I said before, was where it felt like the character was headed anyway. But at the same time, other than the straight hair, a side-by-side comparison shows that there isn't too much of a difference between her old look and new look. Overall, it's a redesign that is harmless, bringing about a change that doesn't quite ruin her as a character. Sadly, I couldn't say the same for Aku Aku. Now his face looks far more stretched out compared to his previous iterations, and there's just something that looks so unnatural about it. I think it has something to do with how much smaller his feathers are compared to the rest of his body. Proportions, Radical. Also, I must mention that the icing on top is that really uncanny smile he gives. Yeah, I can't really say that I'm a fan of this design. Now Uka Uka, that's another story. Now this is Someone's Beast. I really like the bones that dangle from the sides of his head. It really gives off a menacing look compared to when it was simply adjacent to his face in previous installments. Not to mention that he's basically a skull with no mouth. Like, I don't know what looks more threatening. It's interesting how concept art has shown that he used to have a lower jaw piece, but this detail combined with the red glow surrounding his form really sells him as a twisted, deformed version rather than somebody who is kind of similar to Aku Aku. Contrary to what others think, he's probably the best example of a redesign gone right. Now, Tiny, on the other hand.
Crash, I really am cross with you. I'm just trying to do my job, and you go and cause all this chaos. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to eat your face.
Okay, so I'm sure everybody can agree this was pure cringe. He seems to have completely been reshaped to resemble an actual common tiger rather than the Tasmanian tiger he used to be. And a lot of the old muscle mass that he used to have has now been replaced with somewhat skinnier arms. And then when he speaks...
Yeah, I'm really sorry about that. I wish some sort of reconciliation was possible here. And frankly, I'm still mad about the last game. You didn't even invite me.
Okay, I know I'm going a little off topic, but what the fuck happened to him? Remember when he broke through those pillars in ancient Rome? He was ready for battle. Here he comes cowering before Crash as if he's really scared. Look, he's off the Shellephant. Crush him, crush him, crush him, crush him, crush him, crush him, crush him. Dude. What the fuck? He was right there. Well, I guess they took the name Tiny a bit too literally. The only other design that is worth mentioning is Nina. Now, the original design looks kind of uncanny, so the fact they tried to liven her up helps a lot. Her hair now sticks up like bed hair from a Saturday afternoon awakening, and her buck teeth are also not as apparent. Moreover, her school uniform now sports a tie as if to have the appearance of being an evil, snooty businesswoman, which really fits considering how manipulative she is in asserting her control. More on that later as we talk about the story. But of course, you're probably wondering about Engine, Cortex, and Crunch. Well, Engine and Cortex arguably look identical to their past counterparts, the only difference being a dash of blue paint added to Engine's color palette and Cortex's head looking a bit more elongated, for lack of a better word. As for Crunch, honestly, there isn't a whole lot to say since he's barely in the game. He gets frozen and never frees himself until the end. Basically a non-entity. Alright, that's quite a lot of time spent talking about the redesigns. Of course, naturally I'd move on to talk about the characterizations, but in order to do that, I need to cover the story. So the story opens showing Crash's origins. It's kind of funny considering this isn't a reboot. Or at least, I don't think it is. Anyway, the shadow puppets are cool to look at, and I guess the revised origin of Crash is interesting, although Uka Uka acts as if Crash was always created by the Evolvo Ray, when in the intro Cortex made him with the mutation ray gun.
Tell me, Crash, do you remember the Evolvo Ray? Let's see what happens when I use the Evolvo Ray on myself!
So that's a bit of an inconsistency. Nevertheless, it's still a nice way to set up how the mutants came about and how Nina and Cortex are competing for power, which becomes a big plot point in the story. However, the narrative really begins when you boot up the first level and see the Bandicoots relaxing in the open. A Apparently, Coco is working on how to recycle butter. Don't ask. The game just sort of states this with no context.
Crash, help me get this gizmo working! At long last, the world will have a way to recycle butter!
What a fine way to introduce the main protagonist. A burp joke. 10 out of 10. Unfortunately, their restful afternoon is interrupted by Cortex riding in his blimp. From there, he captures Coco and Aku Aku and freezes Crunch. Crash, desperately scrambling to figure out what to do, throws the butter recycler at Aku Aku's cage. However, Cortex still gets away with Coco. With Aku Aku at his side, Crash must journey across Wumpa Island to save his sister, who's being forced to build the Doominator that will smash his home. Sounds like another game where we need to stop Cortex, right? Well, it would be if he wasn't the first boss of the entire game. From there, Uka Uka decides that he's fed up with Cortex failing all the time and decides to enlist Nina as a replacement. Like, this is a complete 180 from what we usually see in Crash games. The only other game where Cortex wasn't the main villain was in Entranced. Man, I can't wait to see how they explore this. Well, there are only a handful of scenes where we get to see Nina in leadership, and they're mostly towards the end. Perhaps I could say that Crash of the Titans' story has a pacing issue. A good chunk of the middle portion of the game has Crash running into old foes, who inform him on more of the whereabouts of Coco, and Nina never reappears until the end of episode 13, and we never get to see her do her worst until the end of episode 17, which is close to the end of the game. Nina is an underutilized character, which is a shame considering this twist could have taken the story many places if it had more scenes featuring it. Let the audience see the torture she's inflicting on either Coco or Cortex, because all we get are one or two scenes where she's asserting her dominance by swinging Cortex to the side or brainwashing Coco, but there's not much else because more emphasis is placed on Crash's interrogations of Tiny and Engine. To demonstrate, here's what the story of Titans ultimately boils down to.
Cortex, you have failed me far too many times. I'm going to replace you with Nina Cortex. Nina, make Coco finish work on the Doominator, while the rest of you henchmen impede Crash on his journey.
Moments later.
Alright, Tiny. You'll tell me where Coco is. Yeah, well, you're gonna have to trek all the way to Engine's lab in order to find her. Oh, thanks for letting me know. I'll teleport there right now.
A few moments later.
Alright, Engine. Now you'll tell me where Coco is. No, I am afraid your princess is in another castle. Oh man, does this ever end?
A few moments later.
Alright, Uka Uka. You're the big boss. Now you'll tell me where Coco is. I'm afraid you're too late, Crash. Coco has already completed the Doominator, and we will use it to smash Wumpa Island. And once we're done with that, she's finished too.
So maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but while the plot twist of Nina taking over for Cortex was revolutionary, it isn't explored enough, thus causing the story to follow a rather formulaic plot of Crash encountering different villains over the course of the game who simply tell him, "Your princess is in another castle." However, that being said, while the story might suck, the main strength of the writing comes from the characterization. Despite the fact that many of the villains have such little screen time, they manage to make up for it in their personalities. Engine best exemplifies this with just how hammy he has become.
Thank you, Master!
He basically hates being one of Cortex's underlings, but struggles so hard to like it as if this is his 9-to-5 shift. The thing is, Nolan North turns this trait up to 11 with his over-the-top performance. Just watch this scene and tell me you aren't clueless as to what's going on.
They made it here! Now they'll help us save Dr. Cortex! Don't be ridiculous! You're stupid! Hold on it! We're with Nina now! We're with the winner! But Dr. Cortex is our friend. You don't have any friends. He always kicked you in the tuchus and other very gentle spots. But I liked it when he did that. It was kind of fun. Listen, we make a deal with this filthy rodent and Pine Nut's face, and they help us save the Master. Then we shower them with doom. Yes! We shower them good, right in the eyes.
It's just so nonsensical. The combination of North's acting and the script really throws this overboard and makes you wonder, what does this have to do with the plot? And to be honest, it just works. What could have simply been just a straightforward relay of information on the whereabouts of Coco ends up being a parody of the inner conflict between Gollum and Smeagol in Lord of the Rings. And that's the essence of the charm in Crash of the Titans. Sadly, there aren't too many examples like Engine in the game, but the next closest thing to him is Nina. I already mentioned how she came across as a snooty businesswoman, and it's an improvement over the lifeless schoolgirl in Twinsanity. It's hinted that she has a superiority complex when comparing herself to her uncle, as seen with how aggressive she is in handling him and how ready she was to take his place.
Sorry, Uncle, but it's time for some young blood to lead us to victory.
It's also kind of hinted towards the end that Cortex maybe abuses her, or at least is overly exacerbating towards her, almost to the point that she's constantly trying to please him.
Why did you rescue me? I betrayed you, took over your evil plan, and then failed.
Oh, Nina, betraying me is the most vile, evil thing you could have ever done. You were a skank. I'm just so proud of you right now.
Hooray!
It makes Nina have more dimensions. Considering that Cortex abuses the power he has over her, when Uka Uka gives her the chance to be just as good, if not better than her uncle, Nina jumps on it by torturing Cortex, in one sense getting back at him for all the times he had looked down on her. It creates a bit of a power play dynamic between them. This ultimately makes Nina a fairly in-depth and sympathetic villain. From Gruntilda to Bowser, 3D platformer villains have usually been pretty black and white evil, so the fact that you can create a degree of empathy for Nina really is a welcome change for the genre.
Hooray!
Even Uka Uka, who is probably the most out-and-out evil villain in the series, has some gray area going on. It's not quite the same as having the same complexity as Nina, but Radical did add a touch of humor to him. For every evil line of dialogue he says, a joke often follows it.
Oh yes, I will kill Crash Bandicoot. Kill him forever. Oh, I love this part. Okay, it's done. And Nina will have no more use for your lovely sister, so she's finished too. I get the last laugh. I'm laughing now too, just in case.
Some might say that it dilutes the villainy of Uka Uka, especially with his new design, but I find it to be charming that his evil side is balanced out with dry wit and a bit of charisma. It gives this version of Uka Uka a different taste that doesn't feel worse than his original self. Unlike Tiny. He doesn't play the humor too hard to the point I can't take him seriously, but he's also not so evil that his character becomes stale. I don't know how else to describe it other than that it's just the right balance. Also, as a fun fact, he's voiced by none other than Joe DiMaggio, Hammerhead himself. But then we get to Cortex. Now, as the games have been progressing, Cortex's role has gotten more and more like a secondary villain. It culminated in this game where Uka Uka removed Cortex for Nina, so it fits that for the majority of the game, Cortex is a total goof. However, unlike in Crash Twinsanity, this personality has a reason for being there, considering that he's now belittled by none other than his niece. So it's not like his buffoonery came out of the blue, as it seemingly has in some recent titles. Rather, it now has more bearing within the plot, which is an improvement. There's not a whole lot to say about Cortex, since he's now playing second fiddle. although I will say that he is the source of saying some suggestive lines. I mean, I guess Titans did raise things a notch by adding a joke about abortion.
Crash! Get out of my robot! This is my body and my right to choose!
But some of the lines that came out of Cortex are especially weird, mainly because he seems to be directing them towards Coco.
Cortex, why do you keep doing stuff like this?
Well, actually, it's pretty fun. You should try it. You know, riding around in huge rumbling machines and whatnot. Very stimulating.
Okay.
Oh, gross. Get a room.
No.
Yeah, I don't know. It just rubbed me the wrong way. Speaking of which, Coco definitely has a bigger role compared to previous games. Titans might have her spending a lot of time as the damsel in distress. However, she comes across as more of a defiant captive over a helpless victim. Of course, sometimes she can be a little too annoying and somewhat bratty, and Debbie Derryberry adds more sass to her voice compared to previous games, kind of emphasizing more of the teenage vibes. However, other than that, it was good to see Coco have a bit more of a part to play, especially considering how she just felt like a side character in previous games. As for Crash himself, I used to say that his CNK depiction was his best. I'd now switched that placement to his Titans' portrayal. While it is true that they made him excessively goofy and a bit funnier in a lot of areas, there is some subtlety to Crash's character. For instance, there are many times where he's clearly distressed for the safety of his sister. When Uka Uka threatens to offer the first chance he gets, Crash shoots a look that can only be read as a combination of terror and determination. In the beginning of Life's a Beach, he collapses to the ground, pounding his fists. This journey is distressing him, and he isn't sure how much more he can take it. Boy, can I relate, having worked 8-hour work shifts. These little scenes, as insignificant as they may be, provide Crash with more depth because they don't paint him as a simple tongue-in-cheek fellow. Rather, he is someone that so desperately wants to save his sister, which raises the stakes a bit. Unfortunately, I couldn't say the same for Aku Aku. I mean, he does seem a little more aggressive than usual, and seems to be losing his grandfatherly folksy persona. This trait is too heavy-handed at times that he can come across as mean and a bit of a bully.
Listen up, corn dog. You help us, or Crash will sing you some knuckle music.
Other than that, there's not much to say about him. And before you say I skipped Tiny and Crunch, well, Crunch barely appears, and as for Tiny...
Stop! No more, please! You're just too stupendous and fantabulous!
Well, thanks a lot, Mike Tyson.
So Crash of the Titans has a lot of its strength in its characters that make up for its weak story. However, this isn't just in the main characters. NPCs and mutants add just as much personality as Engine. In the first level where you encounter the Ratsicle, you'll see them all in a line showering in the bathroom. Your first thought is to wrinkle your nose in disgust at the thought of a shower scene in a Crash game. But it has that charm in which the concept is so unusual, it just sort of works. Now if they were humans, that'd be a different story. Speaking of a Ratsicle, let's move on to the next contrary aspect of Crash of the Titans, the gameplay. So the argument mainly consists of, because Crash of the Titans plays so differently compared to the other Crash games, it can't be in the same league as the others. Or, it's a good game, just not a good Crash game. Well, for the former, just because the game is different doesn't make it less fun to play. Yeah, others might complain of the game being too repetitive, but I don't think repetition is as much of an issue over expanding ideas to their fullest potential. As for the latter, this is a Crash game with Crash characters. Maybe there are some changes, but some of these changes work, and I'd rather play something different over something too similar to its predecessors. So I applaud Radical for not playing it too safe, and, as you'll see with the gameplay, it has little elements of the classic Crash while still revamping it for the most part. It has the straightforward platforming, though not as dominant as before. It has Wumpa Fruit, though now only used for health. So there are enough staples of the series that I'd call this a Crash game despite the changes. Get it? Got it? Good. As the title implies, the game involves taking control of mutants and using them to either progress through the level or gain an advantage in combat. I like how a lot of these titans are an amalgamation of other animals, like the Scorporilla, which is a combination of a scorpion and a gorilla, or how the Stench is a hybrid of a vulture and a skunk. It really fits the spirit of Crash Bandicoot having all these combined animals like Kwa Kong. The game does a solid job of introducing different titans in each section of the game, so even though there are repeats, you're bound to encounter a Shelliphant or a Sludge later in the game, which mixes things up. Even though most titans control identically, each having a strong, weak, and super attack, some of them do have their own individual features. Timing your punches with the Magmadon will cause it to perform a guard-breaking gut punch to its foe. While I struggle to pull this off, timing the punches with the Shelliphant will cause it to endlessly pound its enemy, easily stun-locking it. It's these kinds of subtleties that add hidden depth to what would otherwise be a button-mashy action game. Additionally, some of the titans have special gameplay styles. The Snipe and Electric are projectile-based, meaning they can shoot enemies at a range and even fire multiple targets at once. The Rhino Roller can curl up into a ball, Sonic the Hedgehog style, and devastate everything in its path. Overall, there's a lot of good variety with the Titans. Too bad most of the time they are simply used to solely kill enemies. Most of the levels revolve around progressing linearly, engaging in beat-em-up style combat. However, since there is some platforming involved, the Titans' abilities could have been used more creatively. There are a lot of lava rivers and hot surfaces in Engines levels. Imagine how cool it'd be if we had to use the Ratsicle's ice powers to cool down those areas to make paths to cross. Or another scenario could be how the Shelliphant's special attack has it spewing out a blast of orange flame from its trunk. A creative way to utilize this ability is if the Shelliphant needed to power up generators by spewing fire into it in order to open up gates or energize powered down areas. The closest the game gets to doing something like this is that the Snipe or Stench might need to destroy a target to create a pathway, or you need a bigger titan like the Rhino Roller to destroy a block and away. Although, they could have done so much more with this. I know by definition a beat-em-up requires you to defeat enemies over and over, but considering some of the Titans' abilities were versatile, I could have seen so many different ways the levels could have implemented them uniquely instead of killing a plethora of minions or smashing machinery. But Crash's gameplay is still the main focus. As said before, Radical revamped his playstyle to be more combat-oriented, but he does still engage with platforming from time to time. While the fighting might seem simple at first, collecting Mojo will allow you to get combo modifiers or upgrades to your health and Crash's spin duration. The Norris Roundhouse allows Crash to go from a 2-hit combo to 4 consecutive punches with a finisher. The Uppercut, also known as the Chin Tickler, can pack a harder punch and can be expanded upon with the Board Slam, a finisher that can almost guarantee a stun. And before you say that Crash can't spin in this game, he now has a spin attack known as the Old School, which lasts much longer than the Death Tornado spin and can be expanded upon with Mojo upgrades. So, overall, the combat is already a major step up from something like The Legend of Spyro per se, because while The Legend of Spyro only had you doing one combo the entire game, Crash of the Titans had you gaining different movesets as you progressed. Moreover, the game is very good at creating situations where these moves are necessary. Having trouble with that Raticle constantly blocking your attacks? Performing the Triple Dragon allows Crash to do 3 consecutive strong attacks and, if done right, is enough to stun a mutant effortlessly. Having trouble being surrounded by a bunch of smaller enemies? The Gyro Jackhammer is enough to knock them back and provide crowd control. Despite the fact it has a lot of different approaches for combat situations, where Crash the Titans fails is how they're integrated into the overall level objectives. So instead of gems and crystals, Crash has to collect voodoo dolls. The main doll has you doing tasks and will change status depending on how much you achieved. The 3 tasks include Combo Master, which is reaching a certain combo number without getting hit, Minion Master, defeating a minimum number of little enemies, and Spy toilets? Oh, jeez. Why did it have to be a toilet? There's nothing wrong with these tasks, but for the most part, it's all the game offers. And they could have expanded on this. Considering Crash has a variety of moves, Crash could have had the ability to perform stunts by switching up his fighting style or performing feats in the midst of combat. Kind of in the same vein to how Infamous had Cole combine his powers in unique ways. In fact, Crash also carries a skateboard in the guise of Aku Aku. It would have been very fitting if Crash was able to perform stunts Tony Hawk style. But alas, this is all but wishful thinking. The closest thing to an expansion of the core gameplay is the Mojo Room, but even it has its own flaws. In every level, there is a portal that takes you to a challenge. Sometimes it has you destroy several targets or collect enough green mojo. Sounds like variety, right? Well, the tasks start to feel kind of samey over time. They begin to feel like, use this Titan to defeat this group of enemies. Use this Titan to destroy this. And the doll you get for beating them is no big deal. It just allows you to replay the Mojo Room if you want. So the gameplay has a lot of good ideas executed well, but they fail to go above and beyond to reach their maximum potential. It's the same idea with the bosses. It's cool how you're able to jack the boss and wreak all kinds of destruction, but as I said with the other aspects of the gameplay, it isn't used to the fullest potential. They all have you doing the same exact action of destroying 4 to 3 structures to end the fight. I wouldn't say it's boring, just redundant. As I said with the Titans, you're controlling this all-powerful boss, and the game simply requires you to do the same shit with them. Whether they be Volvo Ray generators or stone walls, you just have to destroy them and that's it. I don't feel like repeating myself, but I think you get the idea. Hell, I might even say Engine and Tiny aren't even a fight. They don't even lay one finger on you. Good ideas not used to their fullest potential. Good ideas not used to their fullest potential. I feel like that's the theme of this review, and to sum it all up, there's the game's ending. Crash of the Titans probably has one of the most peculiar endings of all time. It's not lame, but it does feel rushed. So Crash defeats Nina and frees Coco. But oh no, the Doominator is going to crush Wumpa Island. No worries, for good thing Crash has the Transpa Looper. Wow, so that thing he puts in his pants in the beginning of the game was a Chekhov's gun? How did he not lose it while riding all those Titans? Anyway, it stops the machine, Cortex reasserts his dominance over Nina, Crunch frees himself from the ice. Wait, why did he have to wait until now to free himself? Coco says some awkward dialogue concerning the state of Wumpa Island. I mean, listen for yourself. I can't be the only one that thinks this sounds rushed.
Let's check the damage. Maybe we can go looting.
Hi, everybody. What the fudge happened out here? Give me a hug.
Ew, you smell like bacon. Our house is okay.
Yahoo!
That's a relief. All our stuff was in there. Oh, Wumpa Island. But our stuff's okay.
Crash says,
Pancakes!
and the game ends.
What the hell was that?
I don't know what to think. It just kind of ends on this weird note. All that stuff with Coco getting kidnapped, Cortex replacing Nina, Crash's agony, it all accumulates into this. Almost as if all of it wasn't quite built up to the fullest. Man, I should vandalize my copy of Crash of the Titans with red ink with that saying. The story had one really cool twist that never paid off. Quite a few of the characters had some creative reimagining, yet there were some, like Tiny, that fell flat. The gameplay was solid and executed well, but they never pushed it to the fullest potential. For every good, there was something holding it back. But, is this a good game? Yes, I can confidently say that. For all the criticisms I said, I highly recommend Crash of the Titans. It's not for everyone, especially if you're a Naughty Dog fanboy, but if you're able to look past that, Crash of the Titans is a solid experience. It's a little on the short side, being only 20 episodes long, but a worthwhile 20 episodes. Wow, the radical entertainment era is starting out really strong. I don't know what the haters are talking about.
Am I not a